everyone. Welcome to my course on the 12 houses. I'm so excited to present this material. This is a topic that is fundamental to your journey within astrology. The house system is the basic way we understand the zodiac wheel. The wheel is composed of 12 houses, and depending on the time of birth when a person is born, it's going to change the order of signs within the houses. This course and module is really only specifically dealing with houses. So I'm going to go ahead and share so what you see here is sort of an artistic rendering of an astrological wheel. And whenever you're looking at an astrology chart, you're going to see something similar to this. Every chart contains 12 houses. These houses are going to be populated with planets depending on the chart that you're looking at. Now, one quick technical aspect, which for more advanced astrologers does become important, and as you begin drawing your own chart, it's definitely something worth knowing. There are different ways you can calculate the house system. So I use whole sign house system. I think it's the easiest to understand. It makes the most philosophical sense to me, and it's the Hellenistic method. There's also Placidus. There's equal house. There's also square systems of houses based in the Vedic astrology tradition. So there's a variety of other ways you could calculate houses. For purposes of this course, it's something we're going to go super in depth with, but it's something that you may want to learn more about. So first, I'm going to give a little overview of the 12 houses. Here's my kind of creative descriptions for what each house represents. So the first house can be about fresh starts. The first house is where your zodiac essentially starts. It is also called your rising sign. It relates to birth, identity, your physical body. The second house is about gathering sources, money, possessions, working. The third house is where you begin to express yourself, and that is communication, siblings, and learning. The fourth house is foundations. That's your family, your home of origin, your ancestry, and your connection to history. The fifth house, I like to call the playroom. That is the house of children, romance, creativity, sexuality. And the sixth house can be thought of as the gym. It's where we consider our routines, our health, our body, pets. The seventh house is the house of love. It's about your one-on-one relationships, business partnerships, counseling, anything that's a one-on-one relationship. It's the opposite of the first house, and so it's also called the descendant. It's where we begin to relate to others and where we see ourselves through others' eyes. The eighth house, I call the house of the Phoenix. It's the house of death, shared resources, death psychology. The ninth house is about trips and quests. It's where we think about travel, philosophy, religion, college, or higher education. The 10th house, I call the Hall of Fame, and that's where you talk about career, reputation, your public persona. The 11th house is about community, social groups, networks. The whole cyber world fits in here as well. The 12th house is the house of retreat. That's the house of isolation, sacrifice, completion, and self-undoing as well. That's a basic sort of quick rundown of the 12 houses. And we're going to go through each house now one by one to sort of go a little more in depth on some of the meanings and connections you can get from each of them. So the first house here, you can see I drew an arrow to the first house. This wheel is drawn using a whole house system in Astro Gold. So the first house is the house of self. It's also called where your rising sign is located. The first house has to do with your physical body and your persona. Some people have called it the mask that you wear to the world. It's also how others see you. It can relate with your physical vitality and literally how you look. It also is incredibly significant because it defines the directions of the rest of the wheel. So wherever your ascendant is placed in the first house, it's going to dictate where the signs go in each of your houses, which again is something for another lecture, but it's important right now to just think about the first house is where we start. This is sort of the beginning. You could also think of it as birth. I like to imagine the houses as actual physical places. I think that's a really great way to sort of visualize and begin to put yourself in the place of a traveler throughout yourself in the Zodiac wheel. So I call the first house the port of new beginnings. Just like a ship setting sail, we all start from somewhere. So the ship is at port, and from here it will take off through its journey through the Zodiac. And if we think about, the beginning of a journey and what does that entail? What happens there and how does that shape the whole journey itself? It's incredibly significant. So where we come to this world, where we come to as a new soul birthed into this reality is so important for the way that we understand and work with the energies of life. And this sort of soul creation point is where you can begin your journey of understanding the self. I mean, for people who are just brand new to astrology, learning about your ascendant in your first house can be such a powerful tool. And that's something that we'll go over in the ascendant course. But for now, I think it's just cool to start putting some images. Yours doesn't have to be a port of new beginnings. You could think of a maternity ward. Like you could literally think of birth. You could think of a seed sprouting. There's a lot of different imagery that can be applied to this place of new beginnings. It could also be a mask because it is sort of the mask in the way people see you. I also sometimes think of it as like a spa or a beauty salon where you go and you become made up. So this is sort of the version of yourself that you're portraying to others. The second house is obviously next on the Zodiac wheel, as you can see in the image. This chart that I'm using, by the way, is Galileo. I chose it because I'm not actually sure why, but I just did. And you can see here that the second house in this chart is ruled by Virgo. I'm just going to put in a little knowledge. It's a little beyond just knowing what the houses are, but you can see that each house has a sign assigned to it. There's no planets located in Galileo's second house, and that doesn't mean that there's no significance to the second house, because you'll always want to look at the sign ruling the house and then the planet that rules the house to understand how this house plays out in Galileo's life. So in Virgo, the planet that rules Virgo would be, so we go up to Mercury here in the 8th house of Pisces. So from that alone, we can start to really unpack some of Galileo's values around materiality, because the second house is all about materiality, working, money, gathering resources. It's really how we define what is important to us and what gives us worth, and how we literally make money. In Virgo, there's a certain sense of practicality and hard-working, humble efforts towards the gathering of values. There's going to be a certain discernment in terms of what work is worthy of doing and what is not. Now, having Mercury in the 8th house of being ruled by Pisces will give this a quite dreamy, idealistic sort of sense. So there's going to be a very highly artistic value to any work done within his chart. And you also will see that in the 8th house, the house of death and rebirth, the house of depth psychology, we see a strong connection to themes of rebirth and regeneration. How does the dreamer imagine the death and rebirth of the system? So this is just one small part of the way we can begin to work with these energies. But for now, I think it's important to just really focus on the second house itself and think about its relationship to earning. So my visualization for the second house is that it's a bank, the bank of resources. It's somewhere where you can place your values, your money, your materiality. And I think it's important to realize, the second house isn't just literally how you make money, but it really is how you find work. Like, is it valuable to you that you have a life full of friends and family? Like, that's a value that can be discerned through the second house. And is it important that you have a job that creates a certain sense of economic stability? All these things can be found within our second house realm. The third house is about communication, siblings, and short-term trips. Also, early education. The third house is where, if you think of it developmentally, you start to express yourself. It's where you go from being, a child that was born to a child that can see themselves. And you begin to identify yourself through your communication with others. Communication is always a two-way street. So this is where we begin to interact with others, and it's not just about ourselves anymore. This is where we can start to understand things like our relationships with our neighbors and our siblings. These fundamental ways that we form our identity happen at this developmental stage and within this house.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be?
So as we saw in the Mr. Rogers neighborhood clip, I think thinking about visually and just conceptually Mr. Rogers and the TV show itself, was aimed at early education. It was such a sense of home for so many children growing up in that period. I know for myself, I have a strong connection to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And you can think of that sort of contained little world he had there where, everyone was neighbors and interacted with each other. Those sort of interactions all take place in the third house. And, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was a TV production that was communicating out to the world a lot of the themes that are contained within the third house about early child education, about how we learn about ourselves in relationship with others. So now on to the fourth house. The fourth house is really the foundations of who we are and who we were. It's about our home, our parents, our family, our ancestry and our history, and also our private world. So sometimes the fourth house can also be, sometimes things that you don't necessarily want seen because it's, there's always something private and hidden when you think about ancestry or your family relationships. And having the, depending on the planets and the signs, can really give us a sense of your relationship with those foundations that are primary to us. I like to think of the fourth house as a home under construction, you know, like actual, the physical place when your home is getting built. So, you know, we come to this world with a constructed home, but it's always actually in construction, because as we begin to learn who we are and where we came from, we start to create a story about ourselves and a story of our identity and our roots, and then we create a relationship with that story. Now that story can be told and retold, that story can be broken and burned, and a new one can be created. You can also create a new sense of home and self in the fourth house as you create your own family in your own home. But there's always going to be this connection to the past and the heritage that we sort of inherit, and that's what the fourth house represents. The fifth house is the house of creativity, children, recreation and hobbies, gambling, sexuality. It's sort of like a playhouse, and it's really kind of fun and ready to go experience and explore and create. So we can think of this as a playhouse, somewhere where once we have a sense of self and a sense of home, we go out and we play and we have parties and we enjoy and laugh and we create children, we create piece of artwork. This is where that creative spark lies, is within the fifth house. Now we come to the sixth house. The sixth house is really focused on the physical body, routines that we create within our daily lives. You know, what time do you wake up? Are you an early bird? Is it important for you to have a regular routine every day? Do you need to have flexibility in your routine? Do you need to only work when moved by spirit? So do you work 3 to 5 a.m. every day? You know, what is the routine that works for you? Creating a health practice that is good for you. All these things can be within the sixth house. You also can think about service. The way that you help others can often be within the sixth house. You can also think of the sixth house as jobs that you're doing. So how are the jobs you're doing affecting your routine overall? Like, what is the routine within your job? How is your job affecting your home routine or your health routine? And also pets can come here. So sometimes in strong transit to the sixth house or strong natal placements, we may be very attached to pets. Our relationship with pets can really tell us a lot about ourselves and helps ground us in a certain routine of service in order to care for and take care of other creatures that are completely dependent on us. So I thought for the sixth house, it would be kind of fun to talk about goat yoga. So there are so many different ways that we can experience health routines that are fulfilling and helpful to our lives. Goat yoga seems like the absolute most fun way to combine small animals and routine and the body. And so you can see, I mean, one person could be a CrossFit person, one person could be a goat yoga person. There's no right or wrong way to do these things. But when we think about the sixth house as the body temple, we can think of ways that we can maximize our sixth house placements and sign to create a routine that really works for us. And because the astrological language is so expansive, we have so many opportunities to find places of access where we can start to explore what will be a good routine for me, what will serve my body, what will create a temple body that is right for me. And then we go on to the seventh house. So the seventh house can also be called the descendant because it's opposite of the ascendant. It's an angular house. The seventh house is where we start to see ourselves in terms of other people. It's about relationships. It's about our sense of the other and the other sense of us. It also can include open enemies and our projection of ourselves onto others. It's any one-on-one relationship lies here. How do you have business partners? How does marriage work for you or partnership? All these things that define ourselves to the other live here. So we can think of it as the house of unity. I think the most common way to imagine the seventh house is through marriage. I mean, there can be a variety of ways you want to imagine marriage. But when you think of a union between two souls coming together, you learn so much about yourself through the other person. And that is one of the primary ways that as adults we begin to go beyond ourselves and create a full picture of who we are, is through our partnerships with others. Now, the eighth house is considered the house of death, which I know can sound very scary. Now, death doesn't necessarily mean that someone dies, although it could. It means, so like having a planet in the eighth house, don't say, oh my God, I'm going to die. That's not what it means. It can talk about your relationship with death, or also the fact, in order for something new to begin, there always has to be a death. The eighth house also talks about shared possessions, depth. So you can think of like our inner psychology and transformation, because the process of transformation always involves a death. So in some ways, after we've come into relationship with another in the seventh, we move forward to the eighth house, where there is a sort of death of the person we were before the relationship, and now we're being rebirthed into this new state where we can go further onto the journey of the ninth house. I think the phoenix is a beautiful way to picture the eighth house, and I have a little video here. So as you can see in some of that imagery, we can start to think about, the phoenix burns itself and then rises from the ashes. And the phoenix really represents the cyclical nature of transformation. So, first you must die in a sense to ever be reborn. Strong eight house placements can be people who completely reinvent themselves based off different catalyst points in their lives. And it's a very powerful house. From the eighth house, when we've been reborn and transformed, we enter to the ninth house, which is the house of adventure, higher education, philosophy, religion, and long journeys. The ninth house can represent our quests, our long goals. And what is our relationship to philosophy? What philosophies do we want to embrace now that we have given birth and been reborn to our new sense of self? So this is sort of a higher realm in which we start to connect with greater ideas outside of the self, and this begins to really define ourselves and further our quest. We begin the quest for knowledge, the quest for meaning, and the quest for self-discovery. Continuing with my visual house representation, I thought that The Legend of Zelda, I'm revealing myself as a big nerd, Breath of the Wild, their landscapes really speak to me the sense of quest. And so I'm just going to play a little clip from the video game.
The history of the royal family of Hyrule is also the history of the Calamity Ganon, a primal evil that has endured over the ages.
That look on your face tells me that you have no recollection of me, however. I think you are now ready to hear what happened 100 years ago.
Everything I've done up until now, it was all for nothing.
Here it comes! You must save her, my daughter.
Okay, so I love this. If you think of the imagery of Zelda and going on a quest, it's really beautiful, and it just sort of shows, the sense of adventure, and we learn about ourselves, about the past, about who we were, as a collective conscious through our adventures, and it's through this sort of adventure where you really begin to identify yourself. And in Zelda, he's forgotten who he was to begin with. So it's interesting as he's learning who he is through a quest upon which, there's going to different memories come up, and the story of what happened in the past comes back. And I think in certain ways, the ninth house and the process of higher education and our connection to religion and philosophy reconnects us back to the past and back to our roots. And it's, yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Then we have the 10th house. So the 10th house is the house of career. It's where we begin to be a public image. You've gone through this whole journey of being born and, gathering your values, communicating yourself to your community, and creating a foundation. And you had some fun, and you found a routine, you fell in love, and then you began to see yourself as not a simple single unity, but you had to be rebirthed in order for you to connect to your philosophy and your religion. And now you're going to shine to the world. So now we're really at the extroverted, active part of the zodiac. This 10th house is your ambition, it's authority, and how you are viewed in the public. It's your reputation. The 10th house is a lot about, literally, like, what is your career? How do you want to be seen? Do you not want to be seen? Is that a place where you can shine, or what are you going to shine for? And so I thought this Game of Thrones clip is kind of cool because it shows, a moment where Bran is having a definite 10th house realization happening.
I've had nothing to do but think these past few weeks about our bloody history, about the mistakes we've made. What unites people? Armies? Gold? flags. Stories. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it. And who has a better story than Bran the Broken? The boy who fell from a high tower and lived. He knew he'd never walk again, so he learned to fly. He crossed beyond the wall, a crippled boy, and became the three-eyed raven. He is our memory, the keeper of all our stories. The wars, weddings, births, massacres, famines, our triumphs, our defeats, our past. Who better to lead us into the future?
Bran has no interest in ruling, and he can't father children.
Good. Sons of kings can be cruel and stupid, as you well know. His will never torment us. That is the wheel our queen wanted to break. From now on, rulers will not be born. They will be chosen. On this spot are the lords and ladies of Westeros to serve the realm. I know you don't want it. I know you don't care about power. But I ask you now, if we choose you, will you wear the crown? Will you lead the Seven Kingdoms to the best of your abilities from this day until your last day?
Why do you think I came all this way?
The Brandon of House Stark. I say aye.
So you get a little sense of his when Bran's being crowned king. And in some ways, I think when we come to 10th house periods or perfection years, which is something we can talk about later as well, you can think of this is a moment when you're placed to the public, or if there's a heavy emphasis in your chart in the 10th house, it can be, sometimes it's not even something that someone necessarily wants. It's something that's been part of your journey always, or it's maybe hidden. It may be hidden from you at certain periods of your life, and then suddenly you come to a place where your public persona is sort of thrust upon you. Now we go to the 11th house. So the 11th house is the house of friendships, of social groups, of community and networks. So in your 11th house is where you can start to think about how does the public career self begin to interact within larger social groups? Like, who are you amongst your entire community? What groups are you a part of? Are you a member of your parent-teacher association? Are you involved in clubs? And the internet is also brought a very unique sense of our sense of community and networks. And as it continues to evolve and grow, this sort of our ability to connect through networks on incredibly expansive terrain becomes more and more possible. And so you can think of, what is your communities on Facebook or your communities in Instagram, or even, not social media, whatever. It can be however you connect with others. This is the 11th house. In the 11th house, anytime we talk about community, it's also about the self because it's you in relationship with others. So you would think of it not so much as the one-on-one relationship with a 7th house, but as a friendship group, as the entire group itself. And how do you interact with that, or how do you create social groups that are, helpful to your soul development? For an image for this, I think because of the internet age and especially with how isolated people have been, it's increasingly we're forming community through virtual environments. And the idea of a networked community is very much within the 11th house anyways. And now that it's gone virtual, it's like we can visualize it and realize it in a whole new disembodied way. It's very interesting, and it's definitely a way in which our sense of self as the singular self is expanded and multiplied and reflected back to us. I mean, we can be more than one person within our community. It's another interesting thing to think about in terms of the zodiac is, the sense of self is complex. By the wheel itself, there's 12 parts of the self. And I think within the 11th house, we start to think of the dispersion of the self or the multiplication of the self. How are you in all of these networks, and how do these nodes of network communication operate with each other to reflect yourself back and to create new versions of yourself? Now we go to the 12th house. So the 12th house is right here. Sorry, the arrow's not moving, but the 12th house is the final house within the 12th house zodiac wheel. And at the 12th house, we think of isolation. I mean, it's the end of this journey. We've become, part of networks. We've become connected to others. And then now we need to go back to ourselves. Here is a point where we may have to make sacrifices in order to connect with universal energies and the deeper collective unconscious that we need to understand and process alone as ourselves in order to complete this journey through the zodiac wheel. It's also can be the house of hidden enemies. It's where things are not necessarily seen. It's like entering into a cave, and you might not be sure what's happening beyond those walls, but within that space, you can complete your projects. You can complete your vision of yourself and take time to really integrate all the different parts of yourself that have been learned through this journey. And so I think the 12th house is a really powerful house, and it's important to think about the power and the psychic connection within that house and how this completion is, again, in the cyclical nature of the zodiac and of life itself. It's about to begin its rebirth process. So you're just starting, you're ending one journey only to begin another. But before any ending, we have a point of retreat. And it's also, if you were thinking of it, in terms of like developmental stages, it would be when you are starting to think of your death. And you can see that at a certain age, we have to face our mortality. And that's what the 12th house is. It's when you can see that there's an ending, but you know there's something beyond it. And there's a lot of power within that house. So just to review, those were the 12 houses. We went a little bit into each of them, and we will be working more on signs, and then how do you place signs within houses, planetary rulership. There's a lot more to learn. I think in summary, it's important to know that there are 12 houses, that each house represents certain aspects of the self. And there's a lot of ways that you can visualize and understand that. And I encourage you to start thinking creatively of each house. And so you can have sort of a visual container in which, as you learn more about your astrology placements, you can place these planets and you can place these, the signs into your own houses as a sort of gateway to expanding your astrological knowledge. Anyways, thank you, and I hope you have a great day, And thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Thank you.